They said I was weak. It started like that, just a whisper behind my back. Quiet enough that I wasn't supposed to hear it. But I did. Again and again. Too soft. Too emotional. Too scared to stand up. Not strong enough to survive this world. They said it with crooked smiles, masked behind concern. They said it like they were diagnosing an illness, not crushing a soul. At first I laughed with them like I agreed. That's what you do, right? You laugh, so they won't see how much it hurts. But tell me something, what does weak really mean? Is it because I don't scream when I'm hurt? Is it because I let others speak louder? Is it because my hands tremble before they make a fist? Then maybe I was weak. Or maybe I was just waiting for the moment the voice in my head would be louder than theirs. It was a rainy evening. The kind of rain that doesn't roar but whispers, almost like it's asking for permission to fall. I sat by my window, watching droplets race each other down the glass. The room was quiet, but my thoughts were screaming. Do you know what it feels like to be overlooked? To raise your hand and never be called on? To have something to say, but your voice stays stuck in your throat like it doesn't believe it deserves to be heard? I knew that feeling like I knew my own heartbeat. They said I was weak, but they didn't see the storms I survived behind closed doors. They didn't see how many nights I swallowed tears like medicine, hoping it would cure the ache. They didn't see me sitting alone during lunch, pretending I preferred solitude. They didn't see how I made myself small, so others could shine. Because being loud never felt like power to me. Surviving in silence did. One time, I almost spoke up. It was in high school. A teacher accused me of cheating. I hadn't. But the shame in her voice, the way everyone turned to look, it paralyzed me. I opened my mouth, but the words didn't come. My heart pounded so hard it echoed in my ears, louder than any defense I could make. I wanted to say, I didn't do it. But I stayed silent. And when I walked out of that classroom, I heard it again. She's weak. That word. Again. Each time, it carved a little deeper. But what if I told you? Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes, silence is where warriors sharpen their swords. There's something else they don't talk about. The moment before someone speaks up. It's not just words. It's years of swallowed pain. It's shaking hands and lungs fighting for air. It's the cracking of chains you didn't even know were there. Have you ever felt that? The urge to rise, when everything in you says, stay small. The courage to speak, when your voice sounds foreign to your own ears. It doesn't come with applause. It doesn't come easy. But when it does come, oh, it changes everything. I remember standing in the bathroom mirror once, practicing what I'd say if I ever found the courage. Looking at my reflection like it was someone else, someone braver. Someone who'd say, no, I'm not weak. You just never understood my strength. But I wasn't there yet. Not yet. You know my name now. But you don't know who I was before the whispers. Before the silence. Before I found the fire buried beneath all the ash. I was born into a quiet household. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind where emotions lived behind closed doors and love was measured in chores completed. My parents weren't cruel, just cold. Like winter sun, present, but never warm enough to melt the ice. My father was a man of few words and fewer emotions. A provider, yes. But he believed strength meant not crying, not talking, not feeling too much. And my mother? She floated through life like a ghost, doing what needed to be done, never asking for more than what she was given. So from the very beginning, I learned how to disappear in plain sight. I wasn't the loud sibling. I wasn't the rebellious one. I wasn't the achiever or the troublemaker. I was the one who stayed in her room, kept her head down, followed the rules. I was the one they didn't worry about because I never caused any noise. But let me ask you something. When someone never makes noise, does that mean they're okay? Or are they just unheard? In school, I was the girl who always said sorry, even when it wasn't my fault. The one who handed in assignments early but never raised her hand. I would watch other kids laugh, run, joke, get in trouble, and I'd wonder what it felt like to just exist loudly. I wasn't bullied in the typical sense. No one shoved me into lockers or stole my lunch money. but I was invisible. And sometimes, invisibility cuts sharper than cruelty. Teachers barely remembered my name. Friends came and went like seasons. And the ones who stayed, well, even they didn't really see me. Until one did. Her name was Zoya. She was a transfer student, all fire and glitter. She wore bright colors, talked too much, laughed too loud, and for some strange reason, she liked sitting with me. She said I had a calm vibe. At first, I didn't know what to say. I wasn't used to being noticed. But slowly, we became friends. Real friends. She'd pull me into conversations I usually avoided. She made me laugh without trying. She listened without needing me to perform. Zoya was the first person who didn't treat my silence as a defect. She called me gentle, not weak. She said I saw things others missed, felt things more deeply than I let on. And for the first time, I started to wonder, maybe she was right. But just when I started believing that maybe there was something strong about being soft, something brave about being quiet, something valuable about being me, the world reminded me of its cruelty. It was a class project, group work. You know how that goes. People talk over each other, argue, joke around. I tried to contribute, I really did. I made notes, wrote ideas, tried to speak. But each time I opened my mouth, someone interrupted. One of the boys laughed and said, "You sure you belong here? You don't even speak up." That laughter? It hit different. It wasn't just about the project. It was a mirror reflecting every insecurity I had bottled up. Zoya stepped in. She defended me, but it only made things worse. "Your friend's your mouthpiece now," one of them sneered. I felt like I was shrinking physically, mentally, emotionally. And later, when I got home, I stared at my reflection again. Not to practice a speech this time, but to ask myself, why can't I be like them? Why do I freeze? Why do I feel like I have to earn the right to speak? That night, something shifted. Not loudly. Not all at once. But like a quiet crack in the dam, starting to let the water through. I started journaling, writing what I couldn't say. Every hurt, every word I wished I'd spoken, every thought I was too scared to release into the world, I poured it all onto paper. And something strange happened. I started recognizing the power in my words. Not the ones spoken, but the ones written. They were clear, raw, honest, and strong. Zoya read one of my entries once. Without asking, she grabbed my notebook and started reading aloud. My heart nearly stopped, but when she was done, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "You have a voice," she said. "You just use it differently. But it's loud in all the ways that matter." That sentence became the seed that, one day, would grow into a roar. But before that happened, I still had battles to face. The world doesn't change just because you're healing. People still misunderstand silence. They still assume gentleness means surrender. They still think volume equals strength. And I still wasn't ready to fight them. Not yet. But I was preparing. Because sometimes the quiet ones are just warriors in training. And when they finally speak, the world listens. You'd think the world would make space for growth, for someone trying to step out of the shadows. But sometimes when you begin to rise, people around you panic. They don't recognize you anymore, and instead of celebrating, they question, resist, or even mock your evolution. That's exactly what happened. It started small. A moment during a group presentation. The teacher asked a question, and for the first time, I raised my hand, not high, just enough to be noticed. And when I spoke, my voice wasn't trembling like before. It was soft but steady. The class went quiet for a second. I thought maybe they were surprised in a good way. But then I heard it. A chuckle. Low. Insincere. Dismissive. "She speaks," one of the boys muttered just loud enough. And just like that, the whisper spread. "She's just trying to impress someone. She's changing all of a sudden. Who even is she now? She thinks she's special now, or what?" It stung. More than I'd like to admit. But I didn't retreat this time. I didn't let my voice slip back into hiding. That day, I learned something crucial. The moment you dare to evolve, the world will test you to see if you really mean it. I went home and cried that night. Not because I was weak, but because it hurt to try and still be laughed at. But after the tears dried, something unusual happened. I didn't feel like quitting. I felt angry. Not loud, destructive anger, but focused, powerful rage. The kind that makes you want to prove that your softness isn't an absence of strength, it's just been unrecognized for far too long. So I pushed forward. I started volunteering to read in class. I joined a writing club, even read a piece at an open mic. My hands shook. My legs were jelly. But I did it. And slowly, I felt the shift. Not from the world. From within. I wasn't waiting for permission anymore. I was making space for myself. But life wasn't done throwing tests my way. One afternoon, just before exams, Zoya came running to me, her face pale and eyes wide. She had overheard a group of girls talking in the washroom. My name had come up. Apparently, some of the students were mocking me in a group chat. Screenshots were being shared. Memes. Edits. My open mic performance had been recorded secretly, and now it was being passed around, mocked for how emotional I was. My throat tightened. My mind raced. What did I expect? That if I dared to speak, the world would just applaud? I felt exposed. Ridiculed. I considered quitting everything. Deleting my posts. Dropping out of the club. Going silent again. Zoya looked at me and said, "Don't let them win. Not when you've come this far." But how do you fight an army of laughing shadows when your weapon is just truth? That night, I sat with my journal open, pen hovering, thoughts swirling like a storm. And then I wrote. They said I was weak, but they never asked how much it took to stay soft in a cruel world. And that's when the idea hit me. If they were going to watch me anyway, then let them see it all. The pain, the truth, the story. So I wrote a piece. A powerful one. I titled it, "The Girl Who Wasn't Loud Enough for You." It was raw, honest, vulnerable. It spoke of how we measure worth by volume, how we mock sensitivity and worship ego, how silence isn't absence and stillness isn't weakness. And then, asked the head of the writing club if I could read it at the upcoming school assembly. My hands trembled as I made the request. He blinked, surprised, but he nodded. And just like that, it was set. The days leading up to the event were a whirlwind. Whispers floated through hallways. Some people rolled their eyes. Others looked at me with curiosity. The night before, I barely slept. I rehearsed the lines over and over. I pictured myself freezing mid-sentence, forgetting the words, walking off in shame. But then I remembered every tear, every laugh behind my back, every time I wanted to speak, but swallowed my words. And I told myself, you're not speaking for their approval. You're speaking because your truth deserves to be heard. The day arrived. The hall was packed. I stepped onto the stage, heart pounding, palms sweating. And then, I began. My voice wavered slightly at first, but then something magical happened. The words began to flow. I wasn't performing. I was confessing, sharing, revealing the parts of me they had overlooked, the parts they had laughed at. There was a stillness in the room. No laughter, no muttering, just silence, the kind that listens. By the time I reached the final lines, my voice was steady. I looked up from the page and let the last word settle. I may not be loud, but I am not weak. I speak when it matters. And today it mattered. The room remained quiet for a few seconds, and then applause. Not forced. Not sarcastic. Real. Even some of the same faces who once mocked me clapped. That moment didn't erase the pain of being silenced for so long. But it proved something powerful. When you stop waiting for a seat at their table, you learn how to build your own. The whispers didn't vanish completely after that. People will always have opinions. But something had changed. Not in them. In me. I no longer flinched when someone laughed. I no longer apologized for existing quietly. And more importantly, I no longer waited to be invited to speak. Because I had found my voice. And once found, it demanded space. The days that followed that assembly were filled with subtle shifts. It wasn't like a movie. There was no grand parade, no standing ovation waiting around every corner. But the energy around me had changed. People started to see me. Not the version of me they had created in their minds, but the real one. The girl who had always been there, quietly observing, quietly breaking, and now quietly rebuilding. It was strange, though, because now that I had spoken up, now that I had allowed myself to be seen, I wasn't just dealing with the external voices anymore. I had stirred something inside myself, something fierce and powerful, but also something unsettled. You see, once you find your voice, you don't just speak once. You have to keep speaking. And with every truth you uncover, more layers peel back. Layers you didn't even know existed. One afternoon, I found myself sitting in the library, reading through a collection of essays on self-identity and voice. A quote jumped out at me. The moment you own your voice, you become dangerous to every system that counted on your silence. I remember blinking at that sentence, the words hanging in the air like a revelation. That was it. That was why the world had reacted so harshly when I first spoke up. Not because I was wrong or awkward, but because I dared to shift the dynamic. I dared to no longer be passive. The real conflict wasn't about what I said. It was about what my voice threatened to change. A few weeks later, I was approached by the same boy who once chuckled during my presentation. He stood awkwardly in the hallway, rubbing the back of his neck. I saw your poem. The one at the assembly. It was actually good, he muttered. Actually good. Not exactly an award-winning compliment, but I smiled anyway. Thanks, I said and walked past him. Because I didn't need his approval anymore. Not because I was bitter, but because I had shifted. I had stepped out of the space where I craved validation. I had become my own source of strength. But life, as always, had another twist waiting. Our school was organizing a regional competition, debate, creative writing, and stage performance. My teacher approached me and said, "You should enter. You've got something unique. A voice that needs to be heard." For a moment, I froze. Me? Compete at that level? The fear crept back in. What if I wasn't ready? What if I choked on stage? What if they laughed again? But this time, something stronger whispered inside me. You didn't come this far to stop here. So, I submitted my name. The weeks of preparation were intense. I worked with my coach on projection, presence, and breathing. We revised my piece, a new one this time called They Called Me Weak, but then I spoke. It was more than a title. It was my journey condensed into one powerful line. The day of the event arrived, and I stood backstage watching other schools perform. There were loud voices, powerful performances, and polished delivery. My heart beat wildly. I was still soft-spoken, still quiet. Would they even hear me? But then I remembered, strength isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's the calmest voice in the room that carries the most weight. When my name was called, I walked on stage, lights blinding, a sea of unfamiliar faces watching. And I began. I spoke not just from my throat, but from every wound, every silence, every sit down and you're too quiet I had ever received. I told them about growing up invisible, about how people mistake politeness for permission, about how courage isn't always found in noise, but in the ability to speak even when your voice shakes. I saw heads nodding, eyes brimming, even a few tears. And for the first time I knew they weren't just listening. They were feeling it. The applause this time was thunderous. I stepped down from the stage trembling, not with fear, but with power. It wasn't about the trophy. It wasn't even about the validation. It was about the moment when I looked fear in the eye and spoke anyway. I didn't just reclaim my voice, I expanded it. I wasn't just the girl who used to be shy. I was now the girl who chose to speak. And that choice changed everything. A week later, the results were announced. First place, me. But the trophy was secondary. Because something far greater had already been won. The battle within. I went home that night, placed the trophy on my shelf, and sat down at my desk. I opened my journal again. This time, I didn't write to escape. I wrote to remember. To remember every version of myself that kept me going. The little girl too scared to raise her hand. The teenager who got laughed at for speaking up. The young woman who stood on a stage and turned silence into a storm. I wrote them letters. I thanked them for surviving. And then, I whispered to my present self. You're no longer weak. You never were. You just hadn't spoken yet. The next day at school, I was invited to speak to a younger class. The teacher said, "They look up to you now." I walked into the classroom and saw young faces, filled with curiosity. One girl raised her hand and asked, "Were you ever scared to speak?" I smiled. "Every single time," I said. But that's how I knew it mattered. Because here's the truth. Strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about speaking anyway. Even when your voice shakes. Even when they laugh. Even when they say you're weak. Especially then. Because that's when the voice becomes a roar. And that's when the weak become unshakable. So now, I turn to you. Yes, you, the one reading this. The one who has ever been called too soft, too sensitive, too quiet, too weak. I want you to hear something loud and clear. You are not weak. You were never weak. You were simply waiting for your moment to rise. And when that moment comes, when the air shifts, and your heart beats louder than the noise around you, I hope you remember this story. I hope you remember that your voice is not a whisper meant to be lost in the wind. It is a force. It is a movement. And it deserves to be heard. Maybe you've stayed silent for too long. Maybe you've been told your opinions don't matter. Your feelings are too much. Your dreams are too big. Maybe every time you've tried to speak, the world answered with laughter, judgment, or worse, silence. But the truth? Your voice is the very thing that will change everything. It doesn't matter if you shake. It doesn't matter if they laugh. It doesn't matter if only one person listens. What matters is that you speak anyway. Because when you do, you give others permission to do the same. When you do, you ignite something that cannot be extinguished, not by mockery, not by fear, not even by failure. This is your time. To rise. To speak. To roar. And when the world looks at you and says, "But I thought you were weak," you'll smile, softly, confidently, completely, and say, "I was never weak. I was only quiet. And now, I'm done being silent." So here's your invitation. Go write your poem. Speak at that event. Start the conversation. Say the truth you've been holding in for years. Your voice is your power. Use it, because someone, somewhere, is waiting to hear exactly what only you can say.